Welcome to the Whose Body Is It podcast. I'm your host, Isabella Malvin. Today, I'm joined by Emelie, a Swedish detransitioned woman, public speaker, and activist. We discuss her experience in searching for an answer to feeling different from other girls growing up, and how she came to the conclusion that she was indeed a man stuck in a woman's body. She shares how her mental health declined steadily after coming out as trans, despite having a decently affirming circle, and the path that led her to ultimately suppress her initial instincts against medicalization by paying for a double mastectomy out of pocket. Emelie describes enduring total body dissociation, how talking with trans-identified women piqued her post-op, and the grief and anger she experiences from losing so much in the face of trans-affirming healthcare. We cover nuanced pronoun usage, self-contradictory online influencers, and the insane lottery of choosing lifelong medicalization in place of self-acceptance. You know, your handle is called Detrans Dissident, which, tells us a lot just from the name that you've selected. So yeah, take us back to how you're in this war right now.
Yeah, I'm 27 today, turning 28. I was 19 when I was first introduced to the whole concept of gender identity. And I think what there is to say about the time before that, I grew up being really a stereotypical tomboy, I'd say. And so I definitely thought a lot about just being different from other girls. And when getting into the age of high school and college and all of that, and just hitting puberty, I'd say that's when I really started to think about being very different, or at least it was like I could really feel the expectations to find some sort of natural feeling about femininity and being comfortable in all of that. But until then, no one had ever told me about trans, what it was, gender identity. That's something I came across when I was 19. And I mean, when someone some people ask me if, okay, so were you one of those kids who spent all your days on Tumblr or something like that? I really wasn't. I was into sports when I was younger, and I just spoke to a friend, and she was within the whole LGBT community already. So, I mean, she was really the one just opening up that door to me. And I think I thought about it for like as soon as just okay, so I have an inner gender, and since I'm super uncomfortable in femininity, I must be at least something in between. And so I just started exploring those feelings, and quite soon I started to come out as intergender. I think that's what you said. Today, I think more people say non-binary, but back then it was intergender. I stayed there for a little while, but I very soon started to think about am I really in between? Because I don't relate to any femininity at all. So I'm actually probably binary on the male side of the spectrum. I can say that I didn't have dysphoria when I started identifying. I had no idea how serious things were gonna get. I mean, I was just getting an answer to why I was different and exploring that feeling. And eventually I felt like, okay, I need to at least come out as trans. And I'd say that's when lots of like the social difficulties started, with like me wanting people to use a different name and change pronoun. I guess like this is always the part that I find the most difficult to explain. But I started to, like, mentally, I got worse after coming out, and I think just all the difficulties that came around, it made me like really settle with I'm actually male on the inside, and I'm not just trans, I'm transsexual. So that's something I wouldn't say out loud, really, because I was also ashamed about those feelings. But that's more or less what I concluded over time. And that's also when like the real body dysphoria started.
That's really interesting, because the dominant narrative with gender dysphoria, as you know, is like it starts with, well, and this might be true for some, but the story is that it starts with a disgust of like the fleshy body and the things that female bodies do versus male bodies, and then that is the path. But what you're saying is your experience was the introduction to the ideology, and then what followed was the like, oh, well, if I'm a man, then I need to change my body. Is that right?
Yeah, that's how I think about it now. The whole like me being convinced, like finding this feeling and understanding it as being a male soul, that made my body even more strange to myself. I mean, I always had this. I know that I didn't complain too much about my body until late, like almost adult. But I would think, like, I would think that it was really important that people around me would acknowledge my trans identity, and that communication was so important that I could think about my breast as if they were giving the wrong signals, so people would read me totally wrong. So I don't know if that's how I would explain it, like back then when I was identifying, but I think that's how it grew from, like, me just, well, it wasn't like, yay, I developed breasts and stuff when I was in puberty. I wasn't too comfortable in a girl's body, but dysphoria was something totally different. It was, I mean, I would agree to the description that it feels like a disconnection from like the image you have in your head about yourself and the way the body looks.
Can you paint like a picture of your environment, growing up? Were you the only tomboy? Was there a mix of different sexual orientation in your group? Did you grow up in a religious household? Like, what was kind of like the backdrop?
Yeah. So I'd say I grew up in a quite liberal family. They were fine me dressing as I wanted, being a tomboy. And I wouldn't say that I met many other tomboys. And the one tomboy friend I had, she actually started transitioning already when she was like 16, I think, or something like that. So and I had another tomboy friend, but she actually found a more feminine type of style when she grew older. So I think that contributed. Like I couldn't really think of any tomboys I knew from being little that kept that yeah. way of expressing themselves.
You didn't have like gender non-conforming older women in your life. Like there wasn't any kind of model of like, you can just stay like this and not, medicalize your body.
No, not really. No. That's something I was missing for sure.
Yeah. The dysphoria kind of starts after the kind of exposure to the ideology, and then you've come out, to your social groups. You mentioned you really needed people to communicate with you. Is that right? That you were trans. So how did that look with the pronouns? And you were saying it was really important for people to acknowledge your trans identity. How did that manifest? Like, what was your experience with pronouns and the kind of the social implications in your circle? Were people really like affirming? Were they encouraging? Was there resistance?
Oh yeah. Well, when I came out, before knowing about trans, I wouldn't say that I was in a friend group where like LGBT were. I mean, I didn't have any bi or homosexual friends or anything like that. So when I came out, I sort of realized that I need to find my people. And so that's when I started to look for trans communities and stuff. And of course, there when I found those friends, I found a place where I could be confirmed and seen as I wanted. With family and stuff, I think it was strange to them, but they were taught that what they were supposed to do, and that was to affirm me as much as possible. So I guess I would say that I had a quite affirming surrounding, but I'd also say, like, now when I think back about it, that there was always this like distance to people in a strange way. I had friends, I had people seeing me as trans, but I was at the same time very lonely. Like, I didn't have very many close friends, and I think this me asking people to change their view of me and also play along, even though they weren't as convinced as I thought they were, I think that made some weird kind of disconnect to the world around me, and that also contributed to making things worse, I think. As I said initially, I didn't even think about changing my body. It wasn't supposed to be like such a big deal, anything. I just wanted to come out and be my authentic self. But during those 3 years, it just really spiraled to something very bad, until I found myself at a place where, like, I knew that being medically dependent wasn't going to be healthy. I knew that for sure. And I also felt ashamed about the whole idea having to change the body. Like, there was a voice in my head saying that this can't be a good thing, like, in some way. I was so bad mentally that transitioning was, I regard it as like my absolute last resort. And also I didn't rush it, actually, like in Sweden, in contradiction to the US. I think you need to go through this evaluation process, meet a professional team, and it's usually at least 1 year long. I did all of that, and I even had a break for a few months because I I said to myself, I need to be 100% certain of this.
So then how did you find yourself at 100% certain? Did you ever become 100% certain? And if so, what did that look like?
Well, I said to myself that, okay, so you've been out as a trans person now for 3 years. And so that's quite some time. And I tried to evaluate those 3 years, and I could only see like this line, like my mental health declining. And the only answer I could find back then was really, I drew a chart where I had like male, female, and like my body is 100% female, and my gender identity is probably, if not 100%, at least 98% male. Of course, this is causing like huge distress to me. So I was trying to like, well, what do you say, like come with some theoretical explanation from gender ideology, and the only answer I could get from that was, okay, you actually need to do this, like and of course I was influenced by, I would read stories, I would go to YouTube, and well, you can find all these transition videos, and I think not only do you like it's presented as this success stories, I think to me, I was I got very emotional like looking at them. I could see a person who seemed to be living a normal life, passing and being respected, and yeah.
Yeah. And like there's some truth to that in the sense that there are YouTubers who make a career out of their quote unquote like success stories and Hallmark stories, and like they've been able to monetize their medicalized lives in such a way that it's so confusing. Like the YouTubers that I've watched are sometimes transparent about like the extent of the medicalization, but it's all like that is romanticized as well, right? Like talking about post-op and the photos, like it's all, the sacrifice is always worth it. But you can tell like from a physical perspective, if you're analyzing like skin and like, what you can kind of observe from their tone and their, how regulated they are emotionally, like it doesn't look good. Like there are objectively things that you're seeing in the picture that look unhealthy, what I would call totally unhealthy, but it's almost an aside.
I mean, what I also found interesting later, so this is when I started to get more critical, and that is like you can go to, I think most of these very popular trans YouTubers, they have at least one or a bunch of videos where they talk about like being depressed, not doing too well mentally, talking about certain regrets, some surgery or something like that. But of course, you need to like follow the persons and also maybe notice yourself how maybe they say they are super happy about one change, but like how are you doing like in general in life?
Yeah, I forgot about that. Yeah, that they're so open also about the depression and the anxiety. And I could see how that's also a point of entry. Like it's super relatable. And it's like with the trans, like with just the whole ideology, right? It's like once they're trans, once they've decided that that trans is the solution and the answer, and like that's the core identity, then it's hard at any point to see that as the root or like the cause of all the other stuff. So it's almost like it's like equated to like coming out with like your like with your sexuality, like saying I'm gay and all these other things surround it, but I can't change my fundamental like sexual orientation because that's just like who I am and how I am.
Yeah.
So I see how it's so hard to break out, which like I want to get to like how you kind of change your perspective in that way. But so did you medicalize, and what did you do in terms of medical transition, if you don't mind sharing?
Yeah. So I had the double mastectomy, and I started testosterone, but I only did it for three
months. Okay. So double mastectomy and 3 months of testosterone. Okay. So in Sweden, were you required to be on testosterone for those 3 months before the double mastectomy? Like were there prerequisites for the double mastectomy?
There are no such rules, really. I think that the recommendation is that you start with testosterone. In my case, I actually have had some like bureaucracy trouble with the papers and stuff. So they said I had to wait for like almost 2 years to get the mastectomy. And because I had some savings, I thought, no, why shouldn't I just do it myself if I can? So that's the reason why I did mastectomy before starting testosterone.
Because there was a wait time, a 2-year wait time. And still at this point, everyone around you is affirming, because it's one thing to socially transition, and at this point everyone's saying like, I'm so happy for you, like this is what you want. Like was there anyone in your life at that point who was like, trans isn't real, or like, like, is there any of that?
Not much. I know like my aunt, she tried to challenge me a bit, because she said she could relate to like being a tomboy, and I would say that she is like a woman who's well a doer and just don't care too much about her look. But I think like I think like if I would go back and try to like think of what I needed to hear, or how someone could have reached out or break it for me, I think I like when you identify, it's like it was really like I had sort of changed, like the image of myself in my head was really, I would look at myself in the mirror, and it felt like my brain was helping out to just really see me as a guy. And I think that's just something unique, sort of, with like adding the whole gender ideology thing to it. And that's also something that my aunt hadn't experienced. Like I believe her that we probably had we were similar growing up and such, but she was never, well, to be frank, she was never brainwashed into this. So I think that's why she couldn't reach me.
Okay, yeah. So she wasn't brainwashed, right? She didn't have this like onslaught of propaganda and communities, and like, yeah, that makes sense. That why she wasn't able to.
No, and like also she wasn't. I mean, I think that like the closest word to describe it, I think, for me when I'm talking about my experience, is just dissociation. Like that's what happened mentally, I think, with the whole me standing in the mirror and really looking back at a guy. So I think that's also kind of unique for the if we talk about the emotions within identifying as trans, sort of. Yeah.
Right. Wow. Okay, so then what happened after the surgery?
Yeah, so that is funny enough. When I started to get critical about things, well, I had just started with hormone treatment, but around that time, I got in touch with two trans guys, two trans men, who were not like the community I had. We were pretty much the same age, and we were more or less in the same, like, just started hormones or were about to do it. But these two guys, they had done it like many years back. So they could actually, like, I was interested in getting in touch with them because I thought maybe they could prepare me for like things to expect, and maybe, you know, encourage me, like, you're almost there, things are going to get better, you're well, that type of thing. And but what more or less shocked me was that that wasn't what they would say to me. They would instead tell me about, like, all the things that I shouldn't expect to get from transitioning. Like, don't expect all dysphoria to get away, and don't expect this to have much impact on your mental health, and like, prepare yourself for struggling with, like, finding partner, struggling with lots of things. So they just gave me a, like, bad gut feeling, I guess. Well, I think one of them said something like, it's one thing to identify as male, but it's something totally different to transitioning into that gender role. Like, it's really not the same thing. Well, something I thought about a lot is the whole, I mean, I would call myself a feminist, even though I know about the big contradictions today, but back then, and I know, like, socialization is a thing. Like, in what way has me grown up, like, living 19 years as a girl, being treated as a girl, and that's the socialization I've had. So what would that mean if I started to live in the male social role? Like, those are things that you just get upon yourself, like, growing up. You can't just know naturally, because you have this identity, how, like, what that language is like, or how.
It sounds like, and correct me if I'm wrong, but like, what trans ideology is criticized so much for is reinforcing sexist stereotypes. And so now you're at the turning point of, like, am I going to play the role of a man as society sees that, like, men exist? Is that right? Like, that's these two older women who were, like, may or may not have been passing as men, were saying that now you're going to have to act like the stereotype associated with men. Is that right?
Yeah. I think that's more or less what they said. That's like, well, you were uncomfortable with the female social role, but you know, it's gonna be difficult with the male social role as well, because there's also stereotypes and norms. Yeah, definitely.
What did they give? Do you remember if they gave examples? Like, for example, were they like, yeah, I'm married to a woman now, and, like, I have to support the whole family, and I only work with men at a big law firm, and, like, were they giving example? Like, what examples
Well,
are they giving?
yeah, well, they were saying things like that they found it more difficult to connect with other men than women still.
Imagine that. I wonder why.
Yeah, right, yeah. And one of them also talked a lot about actually missing, like, being well, not having to, well, she didn't like that people didn't know that she had lived as a woman, because then she had this, well, male stereotypes enforced on her, and like, I mean, this is super ironic, because that's what you wanted in the first place. But yeah, so that's, but I mean, so that's really how I started regarding it. Like, so transitioning can, and that's what I believe today too. Like, transitioning can, if you're very distressed about being very non-conforming in your expression, I think transitioning, at least as a biological woman to a man, that can, like, passing can give you some relief from not being so visually different. But I think that's like the one thing that can ease things for you. And then you have like 10 or 100 other things are more difficult to, like, that's just not very much talked about, but ranging from health issues to the whole socialization parts and missing female spaces and being lonely. Yeah.
So that's like that's the alluring part, is that temporary relief, but doesn't address obviously the root of that, which is that we live in at least here in the US, there's still a lot of homophobia, misogyny. If women knew obviously that they could just be, if women felt safe and accepted in their bodies as gender nonconforming women, as lesbians, as occupying a more androgynous zone without medicalization, there wouldn't be this, attempt. So it doesn't actually get to the root, but I hear what you're saying, right? That there's that temporary relief, but then, as you said, then like fades, right? Because then all the dozens of other issues start to bubble up.
Yeah. So I feel like I can't I can't say that transitioning isn't working for anyone, but I feel like I can point on the fact that there are tons of things that we're not talking about, like ranging from the roots where it's actually stemming from, like not gender identity, and what other problems it will lead to, and so on.
So you were saying, so after this conversation with these two like older women who identify as men, yeah, that was kind of like a crack, would you say? Like you started to...
Yeah, so that's definitely when I well, at least when the bad gut feeling started to grow. And after that, I actually went on the internet and tried to Google studies, like what do the studies say about transitioning? What can you expect from it? And that was also a shock to me, because I had just assumed that this is a treatment that works, or at least it should work for like 99.6%, because that's the rate that doesn't regret it, as is said in the community. But what I found, and especially there was especially one study that stands out because it's a long-term follow-up, like 30 years, and there are no dropouts as well. That's also a big problem when it comes to these studies. And it said that, like, yes, you can expect some dysphoria to go away with this treatment, but you cannot expect your mental health to get better. And in fact, we see like a 20 times higher suicide rate compared to like the general population. And like, I mean, that to me, I didn't expect to get like happy forever transitioning. I was just trying to get more at peace with things to move on in life. But that suicide rate, it really terrified me, made me terrified. And I found another, like one of those meta, like big studies where you looked into many other different studies. And that one concluded it's not possible to say that this is an efficient treatment.
Right.
And that was just like okay, so no one ever told me about these things. Like it has actually been studied, and the only things I had presented to myself were like those following up for maybe a year, 2 or 3, and the ones that has been cherry picked to be presented on those trans friendly websites. So that was just another confirmation to me, I guess, that's like, what is this? And from there, I got so scared that that's the reason why I stopped the hormone treatment. And at that moment, I was in huge distress because I was still convinced that I was a male on the inside and my body didn't match. And but I also I just couldn't continue because of the bad feelings around it. And I would say that I was I was really bad just before started doing the mastectomy and stuff. That's the second time I got really, really bad again. I think it started with discovering Alison Bechdel. Do you know her?
No, I don't.
American cartoonist, and she's like this butch lesbian. She's tall as well, so she could. I think she's passing as a male sometimes in her everyday life, and I just found this interview with her where she was asked don't you identify on the spectrum somewhere? And she was just like, no, I'm a lesbian butch woman. And then she also added that she thinks that if she were young today, she's pretty convinced that she would have identified as trans. But she's happy being this different kind of woman today. And that just struck me as very strange at first. How can she she must suffer from internalized transphobia or
oh my gosh,
something like that. Yeah. So those were things I was thinking, because I was like, how can you look like that and not be trans? And that definitely got me thinking more about what is it to be a woman. The last piece for me was to just find I found a video of a detransition woman. She was just she just teared down the whole idea of gender ideology. And I mean, she was angry, and that was nice. She felt betrayed. She talked about these stupid stereotypes and gender norms, and what is it to be a woman in the end? And it's just nothing else but biology, right?
Wow.
So that's really when I started detransitioning.
Wow.
It was really, to me, it was really like I peaked in that moment when I saw her. I think I was, because I've had these contradictory thoughts for so long. I was trying to put together some sort of puzzle since starting to get critical about the whole thing, and that had lasted for almost a year. So to me, it was really like I peaked big time about the whole thing. And then from that day, I was just like, I was telling myself okay, I know you have this feeling, I know you have this image of yourself being a guy, but it doesn't matter, because you are a woman. It's not a feeling. And because I've been in that mindset for so long, those were phrases I had to tell myself to just accept to myself. being a woman. That was so unfamiliar to me. Like that was had been like a mission impossible for 4 years. So it was so strange.
Wow. And all along you were right, like all along you were right there, right? Like it was, your body never went anywhere. It had alterations along the way, but it's remarkable. It's like, it's so, this is what like just is so, yeah, the biggest contradiction I think of the ideology is just denying. It's like a Byron Katie thing where she says like, you know, all suffering comes from denying what is. Like,
right. Yeah.
It's just your body, like your body isn't an affront. It's just is. It's neither good nor bad. Like it just is. It's just female. It's just is what is going on.
Yeah, and then we live in a patriarchy where there are expectations and norms and stereotypes. And of course, if you break those rules, it's not strange that you're gonna deal with people who don't like the way you express yourself, so such.
Right.
So it just, I mean, it makes a lot of sense. Not if you're trying to combine it with gender ideology, then you will be doing this brain gymnastics like crazy. But if you can finally accept that there is no such thing as an inner gender, it's pretty simple in the end.
Wow. I mean, so you're peaked. Okay. So at that point you watched the detransitioned woman tell her story, you're peaked. Like what was it, a kind of like, what was the turnover, I guess, time from peaking to speaking out? Because I know you speak publicly on the matter, right? You've been on Swedish news channels, is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So well, yeah, take us through that. Like, what was the journey becoming just a going from a detransitioned woman to being like a kind of a very a public woman on the matter?
Yeah, so it's a bit over 4 years now that I detransitioned, and at that time I totally panicked. I had no idea how to talk to people about it, and I tried a little bit with my friends from being in the queer community, and it was just well, I guess they tried to listen to me, but because they saw that I was in like huge in a crisis, but it was really taboo, like making any political point whatsoever. So I actually realized that it was going to be too difficult to stay in the environment, community I had been in. And so I moved, and my plan back then was to, I was in sorrow and I was ashamed, and I thought that no one is ever going to understand this for many years, maybe in 100 years or something like that.
Wow.
I don't know, but like it was, lots of things have happened last couple of years, but back then I thought I need to just try to erase like any traces back to my I had even been one of those people going to schools talking about gender ideology. I had done lectures. You could Google my name and you would find trans-related stuff to me. So my plan was definitely not to go out openly about it. I moved, and I found eventually a new community, more radfem feminists, and I connected with other sisters and some detrans people. And I think just with time, I started to feel the urge to at least, well, warn people about it. Or so I started out with writing an anonymous blog about my story, and then me and a friend, we started a website for detransitions as well. And then I think what's made me go public, because that's just, I mean, it's last spring, we had a book that was released. The title is what is gender? What is, well, in Swedish, gender and sex, it's the same word. So what is gender slash? This is the first journalist writing a book like that, discussing gender ideology versus, well, reality. I would say it's very much like the one Helen Joyce released.
So it's a super transgender critical, gender critical book that was released in Sweden. Okay.
I read it and I just felt like this is so important. This is so important. And I need to go out and support it and show people how important it is and what the actual effects are. Because for some people, they don't understand like how vast reaching consequences this whole changing definition has. So that's when I found the courage, I guess. And so I just made a video on YouTube, and then I put together some sort of webinar with talking about detransition, and trying to, well, I guess that's what I've been trying to do since then, just telling people that detransition is a thing and it's happening and we're growing, and the numbers you hear, they are fake. It's not representative at all. Yeah, just really trying to make people take this seriously.
That's amazing. And then what can you tell me a little bit about the news segment you were on? Was that a debate? Like what was going on there?
Oh yeah. So, and I also realized I forgot to mention that, because there is a documentary that's called The Trans Train.
So good. I've seen the first one and the second one. Are you in that one? No.
Yeah.
You are?
Yes, I'm the anonymized person.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. Okay. I watched it maybe a year and a half ago. So I want to go back and okay. So that's amazing. I was like, of course, the documentary, and I didn't think you were in it. Oh, that's so cool. Okay. I'm going to link that for everyone in the show notes who hasn't seen it. So such a good 2-part documentary.
Yeah. So that was a big thing happening in Sweden as well. I think that was like the first thing, like just bringing up the subject for public debate. Or just, and then they released a third episode this fall, where I went public as well, and talking about the website and detransitioners and stuff.
Amazing.
That's why they asked me to be a part of this in this debating program that they had on television, where, I mean, we have in Sweden, it's they are now debating self-ID, and like they want to make it possible for a child as young as 12 to change gender legally. So that's what we were debating.
And that's still going on now. They still haven't come to a conclusion.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Wow. Yes. And then were there trans identified men or women also that you were like coming face to face with in that?
Yeah.
Segment?
So there was a representative from one of the trans organizations there. And also from the trans healthcare, which, I mean, I blame them a lot in all of this. Like they could have, I mean, it's so ideologically driven, the whole that field of medicine. It's quite astonishing. I mean, in general, I think many people would, at least in Sweden, would trust the healthcare system with like everything they do. They have studies and they like they know what they are doing for most of it. But like with this, it's like just the thing I mentioned, that we do have a Swedish long-term follow-up study, but they like, how can they not look into that and like just read exactly what is showing that people, if we talk about the whole like big group, they are not doing better after transitioning. I mean, that's insane.
Even that it's called medicine. I mean, why is it? I hate these words so much. Treatment, transgender medicine. Yeah. It's such a co-op. Like, there's nothing wrong with a child or an adolescent or even adult who rejects harmful gender stereotypes. Like, there's like the pathology, turning it into something that needs correcting is so fucked up. It's like in the way that, you know, all obviously like all of the trans lexicon is, you know, a kind of a capturing of your language, that extends to the linguistics around pharma, really is what it is. But I think someone who already maybe has a trust in Western medicine and psychiatric diagnosis, because I even hate the word gender dysphoria. I hate it so much. It's like, again, like I when someone says that, I hear, oh, a healthy rejection of gender stereotypes, or dissociation, or a reaction to, you know, like sexual trauma. Like, I hear all the other things, but it's like the word gender dysphoria puts the emphasis on the individual rather than, you know, the society. It's like a way to, it's a distraction.
Yes, definitely. And I mean, it's just, there are just so many things. Like, I mean, I feel like you could talk about postmodernism with all of this as well, like postmodernism and liberal feminism, just focusing on the individual. Like, everything you do is empowering in one way or another, just you calling it empowering. It's and just so centered around the individual. I feel like trans is just summarizing all of this.
Totally. Oh, for sure. You mentioned, you know, the like witnessing the detransitioned YouTuber express rage, like that felt really good. You know, do you feel like you've felt your rage? Do you feel a sense of betrayal from, you know, the doctors, the surgeons? Like, how have you processed, you know, all of that?
Well, I mean, I was very sad for a very long time, and then I started to get more and more angry, just like really putting, like, just seeing the whole picture and just realizing that, you know, I didn't have dysphoria when I grew up, and then I was introduced to this, and that's what started it all. And I just feel like with my story, it's so clear, like what happened and what influenced the other thing, and well, made dysphoria develop. I mean, I am very angry, like, with the things that was taken away from me, that I didn't get proper help, that medical transitioning was always the only thing presented to me that could help. And I mean, I feel like I can say that I'm in a pretty good place today. Like, I've found new friends and like have a pretty stable mental health. But it has taken time it wasn't just a detransition and then everything was fine. I felt like I mean, I lost my whole community. I had to I felt like I was fleeing in a way, and just felt extremely powerless and didn't know how to speak about anything. And I've been very sad about surgery as well. This has really impacted my life. And I mean, that's something that can make me sad sometimes, to think about, like, what would have happened if I were born 10 years earlier. I think I would probably have struggled when I was 19, 20, 21, and then hopefully eventually I would have found others who were like me, and I would just eventually get comfortable with myself. And as soon as gender ideology was presented somewhere, I would just
Right.
I wouldn't seek an answer from that. But then I can also think, what if I guess I'm happy that I wasn't born 5 years later, because then I do believe that I would have started on puberty blockers, probably.
Right.
I mean, there's just the only reason it started for me when I was 19 is because that's when it was presented to me. If someone came to me when I was 12, I guess that's also one of the reasons why I feel it's really important to speak out about it, because I felt like I could detransition because I was an adult. I had the capability to think somewhat critically around things, look up studies and stuff. And I could also just move away. I guess I had that strength to trust myself that things would sort out. But if I was I mean, as a 15-year-old or a 16 or 17-year-old, I can't stress enough how difficult it was to detransition, and how difficult it is for many people I get in touch with.
Right. Right. Wow. So now it sounds like, once you started the website, you're also in a supportive role for detransitioned women.
So the website is only in Swedish.
Okay.
In general, there's just lots of information about detransition and links to other resources. It says that you can contact if you want to get in touch with others, and or just have someone to write or speak to. So that's what I've been doing too.
What's the demographic of the age range of the women? Is it almost all women who are contacting you?
It's mostly women, yes.
Okay.
There's been a few males. I've got in touch with a person being, I think she's 15 or 16. And there's also this woman who's close to her 50s.
Wow.
So, well, I mean, most people I get in touch with is between 20 and 30. But it also varies a lot. I mean, some people believe that, the detransitioners, they are the ones who, most of them would do it early in the process anyway. That's the proof that we're not truly trans or something like that. But some people I get in touch with has been on testosterone for 7 and even 10 years, and even 15 actually.
Wow.
So that varies a lot too.
Yeah. Wow. So what do you say when people say, because obviously I don't believe in true trans. I don't believe in that concept. I don't ever support the medicalization of children or adults under the guise of gender identity. Yeah. What do you say to that when you hear rad femmes, other rad femmes say, trans isn't real, trans is a marketing campaign? Does that resonate? Do you?
Yeah, so I mean, I don't believe in true trans either. I don't believe in born in the wrong body or anything like that. I think what I feel like responding is that trans is a unique experience of yourself that comes, I think, from, I mean, when you're being very different and you also add gender ideology to it, I think that combination makes you disassociate in a way that we need a word for it. And that's how I use trans today. Being in that mindset, sort of.
Right.
But anything other than that, I agree with what many radical feminists are saying. And I think it's really important that, to me, it's been very interesting to discovering Gender Dysphoria Alliance, GDA, because they live transitioned, and some of them express that they wish that they had more alternatives. And I think one of them says that he would do it again. But what's really interesting is that they all reject the whole gender ideology part in it, and they acknowledge that they are biological females, and they went through all of this more or less knowing that they were not confirming or affirming an inner gender. They were just trying to get an easier life from like being very different, I guess. Right. I mean, that's how I interpret the way they speak.
Yeah. Like on the one, well, I guess what they're saying, easier. Maybe it became easier in one sense, but what they're not saying is, or maybe they are, but the lifetime of pharmaceutical dependence and organ damage, and in the case of men on estrogen, shorter lifespan. So I hear that. that I take issue with women like Buck Angel and Scott Nugent, because it's hard, because I feel like they're walking contradictions, because what they're saying is it worked for me.
Right.
But it doesn't work for everyone. And so I think anyone going through the turmoil of should I or shouldn't I will always assume, if there's one success story, that could be them as well. Yeah. So I think, I think it presents a really big issue, because they are still asking that people call them the opposite sex pronoun as well, and that's like getting back to the ideology and like freedom of speech, like that's a violation of like my personal dignity. That's how I see it, to ask me to call you a man when I know very well that you're a woman who's been through a lot. I think it sends a confusing message. Maybe you disagree with, but like with, like women like Buck Angel and Scott Nugent, who are like, children should never be on hormones, blah, blah, blah. But they're like, Buck Angel's like this like steroid filled woman.
Yeah. Well, I think Buck Angel, I haven't taken that much interest in. When it comes to Scott, I think, because I relate to your confusion, because when I first heard, I say him speaking in an interview, he said that like he wouldn't do it again. But so I was convinced that he was sort of, he would talk about like he would talk about detransition and saying things like, well, I just couldn't do it because it's gone too far, and there would be all this big change in my life again with family and stuff. It's just not a possibility in my life, sort of. But I've also heard him say something like it still was the right thing. So that is contradictory. And
can you talk about your choice to use he, him pronouns for Scott?
Oh, yeah. Okay. So what I think when it comes to pronouns is to use it very just as a very efficient communication tool, like what comes. I believe in using what comes naturally to you. So if someone is passing as male, I would use him to that person.
Interesting.
Yeah,
that's really interesting. I'm like the opposite. I'm like, under no circumstances will I do it. It's like a gateway, but you already know the issues, obviously, of trans ideology, so that's why I was curious. And do you feel like you have to do that because of the population? Do you feel like it's you're doing it because also the population of men and women that you're talking to are still using that lexicon, and that's why it's like easier? Because I spoke to another woman, Lee, who is a detransitioned woman, who said to me that she still uses the trans lexicon depending on like her audience, in order to reach like more women who are thinking about, transitioning. Do you think that's why?
right.
Or
well, I do think about that a little bit, because I think it is strategically to if you want to reach out and get people listening to you. But I still think like, I mean, with people living transitioned, and I guess I have an extra sympathy for trans men, because I know how difficult it is for many of them to even detransitioning. Like some of them, with the effects of the testosterone on the voice and stuff. If me calling them him, and that not being too much of a, I mean, if I was gonna say she to a trans woman, I know I would have this process in my head where it's like, no, wait, this is like, where you have to stop yourself. With trans men, I think it comes more naturally in a way. And if that also makes life a little bit easier as a transition person, and not being, will just raise a lot of question marks in a random environment. That's
I see. So like in a public sphere, for example, you wouldn't want to like expose them as the woman that they are by using she, her. So you're talking like in the sense that you have more empathy for women versus the men, which I can totally relate to in, in the context of this discussion and what we know about, women's rights being taken away. And what you're saying is like what I'm hearing you say also is like, it's kind of like a matter of protection. Like you wouldn't be in a restaurant and be like, she wants another drink, when you're sitting across from like Scott Nugent. Okay. I hear what you're saying. It's interesting. Thank you for like expanding. Yeah. Thanks for expanding on that. Like if anyone, like, what would you say to a young woman who's thinking about, starting testosterone, medically transitioning?
I would say that this is an insane lottery going on. Maybe this is gonna turn out okay for very few people, that like you being that one, and us just having no idea of what exactly determines successful transition. I would say it's very dangerous. A lot of things going on right now is driven by ideology. There is really nothing wrong in trying hard to accepting your reality with your biological sex. Yeah. The reason why I say it's a lottery, I think it's really because I think it would be one thing if I could see, if we talk about the group detransitioners, if there were some sort of pattern of like, oh, okay, so those were all the ones calling themselves non-binary or something like that. But I don't see that pattern like at all. Like some of us went on hormones for like 1 or 15 years, or had this amount of dysphoria. Like there's just no way to know who is going to detransition and when. But the thing that we do have in common is most of us, and even the latest studies on detransitioners shows this, is that at one point, like sooner or later, most of us are gonna peak about the whole ideology thing. And I mean, that's really the essence around it, right?
Wow.
Yeah. So I mean, just I wonder how. I think what we live in right now, it's very critical with all the things happening, and I think a lot of things are gonna happen the upcoming years around all this, and like I really wish I could like go forward in time, like 50 years, just, you know, ask people what they thought about all the things happening right now. Now they look back on it.
Nuts. Totally nuts. I know. I wish there was some way to move, like to skip this part and get to the part where everyone is piqued and horrified at what has happened. But unfortunately, a lot more women and children and adult men are going to be, you know, affected along the way. So we just have to kind of move through it. So, you know, in talking about the harms of trans ideology and what is lost, like I know I focus a lot on my page, you know, on like the brutality involved and the damage and, you know, like the things that women lose along the way. But I want to ask you, like, what, you know, after what you've been through in your journey, like what have you gained? Like what did you find on the other side of this journey?
Okay, so I mean, I would say that the first thing that I noticed after like a couple of weeks was that I mean, it wasn't something I was prepared for, but just telling myself I just am a woman, that made my dysphoria more or less go away. Actually, so that was a huge relief. And what I've gained, like more than that, I would say just connecting to people again, because as I try to explain, like, you know, being trans and asking people to play along all the time, that I mean, at least that's my theory, that it really creates a sort of distance to people around you. And in the end, that hits like yourself the hardest. You're the one who's going to be lonely in this. And I feel like that's something I have is much easier and better. And I've connected with women, like the group of women, in a way that I've never done before. That feels very good. And I can also feel like some sort of almost in lack of better words, but this revenge sort of like, you know, I identified as trans because I was breaking the rules too much and just being too different. But now I'm just claiming to be a woman, regardless of what I look like or what I do or anything like that. And that's just a good feeling, I guess.
Right. Yeah. That's actual subversion, right? That's like But the lie with trans ideology is that that's subversive when that's actually reinforcing harmful stereotypes. But what you're doing now, what you're saying, it's like, I am a woman and I'm going to be however I want to be, knowing that I'm a woman. And so like that's.
Yeah. So I mean, throughout this whole process, I haven't changed my expression much.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I grew out my hair a little bit, but the only reason I did that was because I was tired of getting asked my pronoun. I didn't want that. So it helped a little bit. But apart from that, I haven't changed anything. So.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for your time and for everything that you shared. It was really, interesting and cool to get to know you. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Your podcast, and it was nice. It was a nice chat.
If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support my work, please share it with others, post about it on social media, or leave a rating and review. To stay in the loop for my latest coaching programs, hypnosis sessions, free resource guides, and more, follow me on Instagram at whosebodyisit and visit my website, whosebodyisit.com.